meetings being recorded. When social justice movements were taking place in summer of 2020 and things really started to gain momentum, at least at our level at Division III in New England, it kind of became apparent that we weren't going to have competition. During the first semester, we needed to find a way to lift our student athletes up and provide a platform for them to amplify their voice, to make sure that they were being heard. And so we started an initiative called My Story, My Truth. And it was a video series, kind of a brainchild between myself and Daisy Alazy, who was our NCAA Minority and Women Grant recipient. And it was an opportunity for us to learn about the lived experience of our Black student athletes, and kind of spawned off of Clemson did something really similar to it, called, their piece was called Voices. And this was just an opportunity for us to just sit down with our Black student athletes and talk about how they got to Springfield College, what their upbringing was like, what their experiences are like at Springfield College. And it was really powerful. We had a really nice reception relative to it on campus. And then from that, we kind of, we have several affinity groups within our student athlete leadership group on campus, and our LGBTQ group. One of the allies said it'd be really great if we could do something like this for that cohort. And we came up with a series called True Colors. And that was an opportunity for us to sit down with our student athletes who are in the LGBTQ community and just talk about what they're going through, and talk about, again, their lived experiences on campus, what their coming out story was like. We had one student athlete, a wrestler, who used it as his platform to come out, which was really powerful. So those were two initiatives that we took advantage of this year when there was a lack in competition. We'll certainly talk about as the other panelists begin to talk about what this DEI work looks like moving forward. It's easy, it was not easy, but it was an opportunity, was certainly there this year when there was less competition than a lot of us are normally used to. It's an opportunity for us to make sure we were there for our student athletes, but what does that look like moving forward when we start to have 10 or 12 events on a Saturday again, and weekday competition? There's certainly, we can't stop. This is just the beginning for those of us who have really started to catch momentum, and I look forward to hearing some conversations and having some dialogue about what this looks like on your campuses as well. So, Mark, you wanna?
Great, yeah, I'll go last. Then we want to go to the man, the myth, the legend, Sharod, if you want to take the reins next.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having me here with you all today to discuss this topic and really dive deep into it. I know I'm at a Division II school, but at the end of the day, a lot of the different things that we talk about when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion all are faced the same at every campus. The perspective that I was asked to talk about it from was like, you know, that executive leadership, AD perspective. And I came up with the way that, like, you know, you can get a lot of your different initiatives shared and done. And I think the way that you present it to those executive leaders on your campus to get them bought in is, you know, explaining, you know, the aspect of awareness. I had 3 A's and an I. So it was, you know, awareness, you know, being aware of the makeup of your student athlete population. So, right, I know Brian mentioned the Black students over the summer. That was the case that we were talking about at the moment. And then later in the summer, you saw the different cases for Asian Americans and Asians, right? So like the being aware of what's going on, and then the different stories that you can be telling, and that they're not just in one space. So it's not always going to be the Black student athletes. It's not always going to be the Asian student athletes, or, you know, your queer student athletes. At a certain point, you have to start talking about your disabled athletes, right? It's a lot of different spaces that make up that DEI work. So when you're sharing the different things that you want to do, or like coming up with stories and presenting them to your executive leadership for support, it's important to be aware. After that, you know, it's the accountability part. So it's taking that time to really talk with those different people in those different groups that make up the different spaces on your campus, whether it's in your department or not, and making sure you're telling the right stories when you are telling stories. We can come up with ideas ourselves, but if we're not part of the different communities, then it's not helpful, right? Because we're not telling the right story. So we want to make sure that we're holding ourselves accountable when we try to tell these stories, especially as people that essentially in this case are gatekeepers. We control the reins, we decide what goes out and what doesn't. So making sure that we're holding ourselves accountable at the end of the day. And then authenticity, right? So that's talking with those groups of people and making sure that we're sharing the most authentic story possible even if it doesn't always make sense to us, the authenticity aspect is what's the most important. So like, that's how you avoid the aspect of people calling the stuff that you put out performative, right? I'm sure we've all heard that term a lot from the different things that have been shared where it feels performative with how it's done. If we're actually having authentic conversations with the people from the different groups that we're talking about, then it makes everything that we do authentic, real, and the best possible thing that we can do. And the I is intentionality, right? Being intentional with the stuff that you put out and the stuff that you produce. If you're doing all of those different things and it's intentional and you know that it's something that you want to continue, you do all the legwork at the start instead of putting it out, seeing how it's going to go, and then rushing to say, oh, how do we continue to do this? No, if you do the work on the front end, making sure that you build it out essentially. So if you have a really cool idea that you want to do, like what Brian talked about, I'm sure they had like 3 or 4 canned, like if this hits on social, we have 3, 4 more set up and we can space them out with our content. So it could be like a bi-weekly thing. So, you know, if it does become a bi-weekly thing, if you have 2, you're good for a month. Then if you have 4, you're good for 2 months. So then you can start figuring out who do we need to talk to, right? So being intentional with that schedule that you put together for all the content that you create and all the things that you do, that's what allows you to be great. And then when you present it that way with that plan to your executive leadership or your AD, all of the legwork for them where they think, oh, well, I got to figure out how we're going to do it, it's done, right? You've already done it. So those are the 4 things that I always tell people. It's the 3 A's plus I, right? So it's awareness, it's accountability, authenticity, and intentionality. If you have those 4 things, a lot of your DEI initiatives are going to go great because you're involving the people that need to be involved and you're doing the legwork as the people that are the storytellers. That's literally the jobs that you all have. You're the gatekeepers of the stories that get told of your athletic department, and you get to shape how those go out. So those are the 4 things that I have that I wanted to share, and love to take any questions anybody has, ways to approach those conversations. But that's what I wanted to share with you all. And again, thank you for having me this morning.
Thanks, Sharod. Yeah, we'll do some questions here after a couple more things. Nicole, if you want to take the lead now, feel free.
Thank you. Thank you, Mark. Thank you. Good morning, everyone, for allowing me to be part of this panel and share my perspective. So today I'm going to be talking about, I'm in a unique position where I actually switched institutions this March. So basically starting the conversation about DI work and while I was transitioning. So, and being very intentional about how we plan accordingly. In June, like everyone, with everything that happened with George Floyd, it started the conversation, that uncomfortable conversation that everyone avoids, but it was important to have. So being a person of color, I felt that it was important for me to start that conversation, and then see where it goes and see where people stood. And then it turned into creating a DEI group at my old institution to see what that looks like. So internally with student affairs, we ended up having monthly meetings about different DEI topics where it was ranging from race, gender, disability, LGBTQ, just having that conversation amongst ourselves as the adults, and then seeing how we could translate it to how we work with our students. And for us specifically, our student athletes. Then it turned into having a conversation and involving SAC and seeing what they wanted to talk about, because it was my main goal was it's their perspective, it's their story. They're also learning how to engage with other people that don't look like them or aren't from the same background of them, whether it's related to class, race, sex, what may have you. And just having that conversation. I wasn't able to see everything come to exist because of the switch at with the institution. So now I'm back at starting that conversation now at my new institution. So the foundation was already started because everyone involved in college athletics knew that this was an important topic to have, to start discussing, and being very intentional about how to to have these discussions and move the needle forward. On my end, the little things that I was able to do is that I'm very intentional how everyone is displayed on our website and how they're displayed on social media. We all know that there's certain sports that don't have the best diversity, and being very intentional about how to find the diversity in that, so that you are telling a different story, as opposed to just the wins and the losses. So just right now in that space, I know that I'm just trying to have these conversations and making people comfortable with being uncomfortable, because it just, like Sharod said, it can't be from a performative standpoint because people will call you out on it.
Great, thanks, Nicole. I'm going to wrap up our section talking about the Athlete Ally Equality Index, which provides some benchmarks of how you can make your department LGBTQ inclusive and foster a culture where people feel safe and protected. If you look at everything that's happened with Carl Nassib this week, I think, you know, not only does it showcase his own personal courage, but it showcases the environment around him where he felt comfortable within the Raiders organization, with his own personal life, where he was able to express who he is. And I think that's what you want your department to be. You want to create a level of comfort for your athletes that are LGBTQ, so they feel the strength and the courage to be able to be who they are. So I think these are really easy, tangible ways that you can do that. The Equality Index started with just this organization, Athlete Ally, ranking the Power 5 schools on a series of things that they do internally to help create that inclusive environment. And it's now spread to the rest of Division One, and then it's going to now they're going to move on to D2, D3, NAIA. So basically, you know, schools are ranked on a scale from 0 to 100. George Mason, you know, we've worked pretty hard on this, and we're one of 10 D1 schools with a perfect score. And you know, it's you know, I've been on so many panels about, you know, you're more than an SID, you're more than just press releases. Well, I think this is a way as an SID you can get involved in a broader athletic department initiative that can kind of showcase your value while also making a difference for your athletes. So there's very easy things you can do and, you know, pitch to your administration that can help you improve your score. You know, one thing we did was we took our fan code of conduct, which included protections for sexual orientation, and we added gender identity and gender expression, which is something that you know, is critical and important, you know, for people that identify on that range of the spectrum. And just something little like that can make a huge difference for your fans or staff or athletes at events when they hear that. You know, we partnered with our LGBTQ plus office across campus we've done a pride game. We've worked with them on, you know, just language, cross promoting events, things like that, that show your involvement across campus. You know, we developed a transgender student athlete policy that's in line with the NCAA's recommendations that makes those trans student athletes feel comfortable, feel supported. You know, there's important to make sure that your university's non-discrimination policy includes protections for gender, as well as sexual orientation and race. So that's something that you can, you know, check your university's policy and make sure that it's in line with that. And we also worked to create a LGBTQ student athlete group to make those athletes feel included, feel like they have a voice, feel like they can show support. So, so they're all very easy things. If you go to athleteally.org, you can see the index, you can search for schools, you can see how they're ranked. And like I said, I mean, if you have a student athlete that is looking at potentially coming to your school, you know, and they were to Google the score and see that it's a high score, you know, it can really build that level of trust, make them feel like where they're going to go is someplace they're going to be welcome, included, and, you know, have the best opportunity to thrive. So that's the formal part of the presentation. If anyone has any questions for any of us, feel free.
Feel free to use the chat or unmute yourself too if you have any questions for the panelists.
I have something I was going to add. I would just say, I think, Nicole's point, I think, was huge. We're one of the, most diverse campuses in the country at George Mason. And I've seen, people in our department use photos before of fans where everyone is white. And I know that that's not sort of the breakdown of our university and who we are. And I think doing that as an SID, doing that test is always really important to make sure that you're reflecting the people that represent your institution and not just, posting something like that can look pretty short-sighted and like you don't really understand the place that you work. And it can also make your athletes and your staff feel like maybe they don't have a voice or they're not represented properly. So I think that really stuck with me with what Nicole said. I think it's something that, has to, sometimes you just have to have that click in your head, and then every picture you're posting, everything you're seeing, it kind of going from there, it's really important.
Then Mark, we just had a question in the chat. If you have a URL link.
Yes, I will put that in right now.
I'll throw out a question to everyone. How, and anyone who wants to jump in can answer. What was the communication like with? I know Mark referenced some partnerships across campus, but what was it like for all of you to maybe put out this content or have these conversations with communications marketing at your school? What was that like? How did you navigate those conversations?
When we started the My Story, My Truth series, we had a lot of, not a lot, but there was a number of Black students who said, well, the Black student athletes get that. So I want to have that platform as well from an institutional standpoint. Like there's more, let's not just hear the voices of the Black student athletes, let's hear the voices of the Black students. So that was an interesting conversation with our communication staff on, is that something that they're willing to take on? Is that part, do they think that that's a project that fits in their scope? So that was an interesting conversation that we had, that we certainly encouraged them to take part of. It didn't happen, but certainly an interesting conversation.
Brian, did you have an approval process, or was it more internal with athletics that you were allowed, if you will, to take the next step in talking about some of these issues where I can say that we weren't allowed to do anything? So just curious about that on your end.
Yeah, it's always interesting, right? The approval process. Is it the ask for forgiveness or or ask for permission? So I just kind of bounced it off our AD. I said, this is something that I think would be really important for us to do. I think, personally too, right? DEI, intercollegiate athletics allows opportunities for our student athletes to grow in a myriad of things. I think DEI allows us as communication professionals to grow. So I saw this as an opportunity for my personal growth, for our athletic department's growth, as we continue to kind of build and become a more inclusive environment that's only going to ultimately aid in recruitment and retention of student athletes. So it was a conversation with our AD, and it was an opportunity that we thought we needed to jump in with both feet.
Thanks, Brian. We have about 2 minutes left. If anyone else, sorry, Sharod, you unmuted. Go ahead.
I know. Yeah, I was just going to say, as you mentioned, the approval process. I think the approval process in our case was having, again, that intentional aspect of having those real conversations behind closed doors, right? Where it's, hey, I think this is what, can be important. And then hearing the other side, but then also realizing that it's important to these other groups of people that we probably don't think about ourselves. That was the important conversation in conveying that, hey, these stories aren't our stories, but like the stories need to be told. So like the approval process becomes a little bit easier if you say, all right, let me shoot this. Let me show you what it looks like. Like, these are the type of questions we're going to ask. Like, yes, we can ask them in a way that doesn't throw us under the bus or anybody under the bus, but are still concise, poignant questions that get to the heart of the matter. And then all of the great, media training that you do with your athletes, you still want them to share the most authentic answer, but it is a way to share it that doesn't make it seem like they're talking bad about us, because we're still an athletic department that's putting out the content, right? So this is the aspect that you have to remember. It's stories and things that you're sharing that all of us aren't always going to agree on, but if our job is to be a storyteller, you have to tell the story the right way, and you have to actually have those really good conversations. And that's what gets you out of the comfort zone. I think Nicole mentioned it, where, you know, get comfortable being uncomfortable. At the end of the day, you know, you sit there and you have these conversations with these student athletes and the people in your department, and you realize that, like, hey, that the things that they believe in aren't really affecting me, like, as a person, but this is affecting them by us not telling it. And like, we know them as these great, wholesome kids, or young adults and people. Like, imagine if somebody didn't allow you to tell your story and what it would make you feel like. That's how you have to look at it. So when you go into these meetings to get approval, you have to remember that, hey man, we're not experiencing it, but like, I see how this is affecting this person, so on and so forth, right? And that helps with the approval process. And then again, shoot the content, write the content, bring it to people. You might have to edit a few things, but the biggest thing is you have to get the stories out there, because you have to get people thinking about it. And if you get people thinking about it, it becomes a whole lot easier. And you have to help the people tell the stories that can't tell the stories. I keep saying it, like, we are the gatekeepers as communicators. And if we get stories out there, it puts it on one person's radar that allows them to say, hey, I didn't think about it that way. I want to have better conversations with people, and I want to think about it a little bit more. So think about it that way when you present it too, that you are creating an opportunity for longer discussions and continued discussions. That's the biggest thing. We're not going to change it with the one piece of content we get out, but we do get to start the conversation that's continued. My AD says it, and I love it. He said, you know, we're not just a quote tweet or a tweet. We want to be a pin tweet, right? The work that we do, we want it to be a pin tweet that stays there and that we continue to have that conversation about. And then people can come in and quote tweet it from there or retweet it. But we want this to be a continued conversation. So we want to be a pin tweet at the end of the day.
Thank you, Sharod. We are going to switch back into the main breakout room, and then you'll get to talk with the other side of the panelist group. So we'll go ahead and do that now, okay?
Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon on the East Coast and the Eastern time zone. It's still morning where we are. Luckily here in Alabama, we get the Central time zone, so we get to hang out a little bit longer in the morning. Again, I'm Travis Jarome. I'm the Director of Athletic Strategic Communications at Alabama State University. For those of you that don't know about Alabama State, and this is what I told the first group, we are in the Deep South. We're in the capital city of Alabama, in Montgomery. We're an HBCU, which means I'm in the minority in both as far as race and gender in our athletic department and on our staff. And I may have messed the numbers up. I had to go back and recount. I think I got them right. On our executive senior staff, our Director of Intercollegiate Athletics is a female who leaves. Her last day, Jennifer Lynn Williams, is leaving to go to USA Basketball. So we're losing a leader in DEI. We're losing a leader in our institution and our athletic department. But she's a great example for me to follow. On our executive senior staff, we have 3 members. We have the AD, the Deputy Athletic Director, and a senior associate who's over internal. We lost one. We weren't able to fill that back. But of those 3, 2 are female, 1 is male. And then you look at your senior staff. Our senior staff, we have 8 people. We have 5 females and 3 males. So I'm in the minority on both, which is a great example for me to follow when you're starting to talk about a diverse and inclusive environment. Just for the simple fact, I've got a great example to follow in how you hire and how you go through and figure out what you want to do. For us in this profession, it's always been and always, has been, predominant, a male predominant business, not only male, a predominant white male organization and profession. I didn't tell this to the first group, and I regret I didn't tell it to them, but I told somebody last night, I chose to come to an HBCU to make a difference. challenge myself and to get better and to make a difference. And I feel like we have here, the way we hire here, obviously we always open things up for full-time staff. We have to, because of the state of Alabama regulations, not only because of the state of Alabama, because I have somebody who's in my household who is in the ethics in the Department of Labor, and my wife makes sure that we follow everything to the T. So for us, we have to do that. But at the end of the day, we choose who we want as somebody who works with us, as everybody does. I mean, I'm sure you all go through the process, but you always have in the back of your mind who you want. Since I've been here, and I told this to the first group, I came in with, this department used to have 5 people. When I got brought in the department, they brought 3 of us in and eliminated 2 of the positions. I came in as the assistant director because I wanted to just sit back, put my feet up on the desk and make a difference and figure out how to do it. I'll be honest. Within 6 months, our director left. So then there were just 2 of us. I became the interim director. A week later, they promoted me to the director. And then we had a female, our female left within a year and a half. So it was just me. So I had 1 person. So I had to go through the hiring processes quickly in order to get it. So I felt, and I did what was comfortable in the first hire. You know, I went to somebody 45 minutes up the road and hired somebody who looked like me, thinking, okay, this will work because I can get them to come in. Totally wrong move. I've had 3 other assistants since then. 2 have gone on and been promoted, or promoted not out, but to a bigger institution of what they want to do. One was a black male, one was a white male. I'm on my 4th assistant. I handpicked him. He's a black male from Alabama A&M, another HBCU here in the state. I have an intern. I've had several interns. And I think the biggest thing of what I want to tell you is when you go through the hiring process, what we've done here, we've made a concerted effort to hire. Like I told you, I'm in the minority where I'm at, but we've made it to hire minorities and females as interns. I've had 2 male interns since I've been here. I've had 11 female interns since I've been here. And all of them have either gone to grad school or gotten jobs. And the best intern I had, we hired her in January. She's already gone and she's going to grad school out of state and she's going to work in their department. But we try to promote to get them hired as either an intern in grad school or whatever. But what the biggest takeaway I want you to take from me is when you go to hire, don't do it just to do it. Don't say, I got to hire a female. Well, I got to hire a minority. Hire the best person for the job. Cover their name up. That's what we do on our resumes, and we look at what they do. And then that's how we choose who we want. And if it comes down to a tie, we take the name off before we go to bring them in for an interview. And that's how we decide. You know, we've had some knockdown dragouts. We interview our interns. We make them go through a process for their full-time employees, because at the end of the day, they're going to work for us. We want to make a difference because, again, at the end of the day, I'm not going to be in this chair the rest of my life. I don't even, be honest with you, I don't even know how much longer I'm going to be in communications. You know, it could be 2 weeks from now, it could be 6 years from now to where things happen. It could be when the next AD comes in, we shift things around. I've had conversations with potential athletic directors on shifting things around. Well, again, if I get shifted and promoted, that gives me a chance to hire somebody else to come in and take my place. So again, it's that hiring process. So when you go to hire, and again, Sarah, I apologize, I have to say it. Don't just do it to check the box. Don't just do it to say I did it. Do it because you want to make a difference. Do it because you want to help that person grow. Do it because at the end of the day, this is the generation that is going to lead us into the next generation as far as this profession. It's already changed. It's changed since I've been in. And I told my assistant the other day, I was like, look, just so y'all understand how we used to do things. We used to handwrite stats and we used to fax them into the newspaper. And the first thing that came out, a couple of people that were sitting up here, and I ain't never seen a fax machine. So, I mean, that kind of tells you where this profession's going and how it's gone. But again, and I'll leave you on this. And if you have any questions, you can ask us in the breakout room. And I'll be glad to give you my contact info. But when you are going through the hiring process and you reject somebody, make sure you personalize that email so they understand why they didn't get the job. And they understand it's not because you hired another male or it's because you hired a female. If you hired a female, don't let the males know that, oh, I hired a female, because they're gonna be, oh, well, they just hired a female to hire a female. Trust me, I hear it all the time. This is the first time in my career I've ever worked with a female supervisor. I have loved every day for the last 5 years. You know, she lets us grow. It doesn't matter if she's female, if she's male, she's in the business for the right reasons. She lets us grow. She lets us dictate what we want to do, how we want to do it. And at the end of the day, that's how I've learned. But personalize the email, because who's to say, and I'll use Katie as the example again, who's to say we don't hire somebody, but they apply to go work for Katie. But you've already just sent a blanket email saying they need to do this, they need to do this, they need to do this. Well, they get into that interview with Katie and they tell Katie about an email they received from Travis Jarome. And so Katie knows me, Katie's going to call me, and I'm going to have to tell Katie the reason they didn't get it if I didn't tell the real reason in the email. Just be personable. Just be, personalize everything you do with them. At the end of the day, it's better that way. At the end of the day, it's better for that person to know why they didn't get the job or why they did get the job. We base ours, when we put out information for hiring, we don't put out, we're looking for a male. We don't put out, we're looking for a female. We put out that we're looking for the best individual person. And we want to get as many things in as we can, especially with interns here. And I'll tell you this, and this is how I'll end. Our communications department here knows what we're looking for in interns. And 90% of the time, they send us exactly what we're looking for, which ends up being a minority male or a female, even though we're at an HBCU. But at the end of the day, we go with that best qualified person, and it just happens to be 11 females that we've done. And out of those 11, we've got 9 full-time jobs, and we're working on the last 2. But build that network, and sometimes you've got to go outside of your network to find somebody. But at the end of the day, don't base it on checking a box. Base it on the best person, and use an example. I have a great example in-house. Our athletic director who's leaving has ingrained in us what to look for when we hire. And they've actually put that in the job description for the new AD, that you have to be able to work in a diverse and inclusive environment and hire a diverse and inclusive staff. So that's where we are here. I hope you got something out of it. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me when we break back in to the main session. If not, I'll put my information in the chat, and that way you have it, but I'll turn it over to Sarah and Katie.
Awesome. Thanks, Travis. So I'm in a little bit of a different position than Travis. I'm not I'm a little lower on the totem pole in my job. I'm not in a hiring position. And so I was kind of thinking about what I actually wanted to talk about for this panel. And I think the biggest thing that I kept coming back to is what scares people about diversity and inclusion work, kind of what makes people the most nervous. And I think for most people, it's what's most nerve-wracking is just how to get started. It can kind of seem overwhelming. It can seem kind of large scale. You can kind of think like, oh, what's my role in all of this? And I think for me, allyship, representation, DEI work has always been a passion of mine. But about a year ago or so, after the deaths of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, I kind of found myself at a point where I didn't really know what to do. I was just kind of stuck. I didn't know how to help. I could see my student athletes were hurting. And I think our community, our campus community, didn't really know where to begin. And as an SID, and I think everyone on this call can kind of relate to this, we want to help, right? That's why we're in this business. We want to help people. We want to be a resource for people. And it can be kind of almost paralyzing and kind of when you don't really know what to do or how to help. So I think the best reminder for me at that time was just that change and progress is an everyday process. It's not one big grand sweeping gesture. And inclusion really should just be this constant active process. And it is a pretty common expression, I think. But for those of you who know who Jess Poole is, a conversation she and I had about a year ago, actually I think it was in a big group in our COSIDA diverse, I think Katie was there, was just that you should be trying to get 1% better every day. And that's kind of stuck with me the last year or so. What am I doing every single day to make sure that I'm better than I was yesterday, that everyone around me was better than they were yesterday? And so I found kind of from that in order to make worthwhile change, in order to create progress, that stems from routine conversation and tangible action items. It's not just about, like Travis said, checking the box. It's not about just doing something to say that you did it. And obviously, certainly these things are good. It's good to show that you're thinking about it. But if you're just posting graphics for Pride Month or Black History Month, and not actually thinking more deeply about whether your department is a safe community for student athletes of color, for the LGBTQ plus community, if you're not cognizant of ability and disability, then you're really not making the most of your opportunity to be a resource for your student athletes, to enrich the student athlete experience. And you really can't create a diverse community without first being a safe and welcoming community. And public perception is a part of that, but there are some kind of deeper levels than just recognition on social media. So I think there are kind of a few really big parts for this. The first is just talking to your student athlete community, talking to SAC. At Holy Cross, we have a group called MOCA and WOCA, that's men of color athletes, women of color athletes, and just kind of reaching out and being like, hey, if you guys need anything, graphics, anything we can do to help you using our skills as a department, let us know. And just having those conversations and kind of getting a gauge of how they're feeling and what you can do. Something that stemmed from those conversations for us was just how these student athletes kind of admitted some of them felt tokenized. Some of them felt like they were being used as just faces of diversity. And I don't think that our department was necessarily doing that as intentionally. I think anyone here on this call would say that you kind of have your go-to athletes that you count on when you need them, when you need someone who's going to do a good job. And I think that we didn't realize that we were necessarily using them per se. And I think that was a good kind of realization initially that we kind of need to reconsider just the depth of our coverage and kind of how we're portraying our student athletes. And then just kind of from these conversations as well is the next step and identifying what your talents are as an SID, whether that's if you're a really good photographer, if you make good videos, if you make good graphics, if you're really good at planning events, just kind of tying into what you're good at and kind of how that can help the campus community and your student athlete community as a whole. Just as a couple examples, at Holy Cross, we have kind of a Players Tribune style thing. So just creating a platform on our website where athletes can kind of write about how they're feeling, say how they're feeling, whether that's a podcast series or a video series. And I think Brian talked a little bit about this in the other breakout room, but just using what you have within your SID department as a resource for these student athletes is really valuable. And then another thing we did as well, I'll try not to take up too much time so Katie can talk too. Another thing we did as well was a big initiative this year was voter registration, which kind of at surface level doesn't really necessarily seem like something that isn't SIDs kind of under their umbrella of their job. But we kind of looked at, okay, we can make graphics to spread the word about how to register to vote. We can do a video series. We can help share this information and use kind of our abilities to storytell and connect with people. And that's kind of a way to really a tangible way to engage your student athletes and without necessarily promoting an agenda. I think some people thought we were still promoting an agenda, but for the most part, it was pretty neutral. But this is all just kind of a long-winded way of saying, just kind of bigger picture that everyone on this call can say SIDs just have such a unique skill set and we can remain a significant resource for our departments outside of the normal statting, outside of the normal recaps. And as you all kind of know, athletes and coaches, both at the college and pro level, are a lot more vocal now. They are starting to feel more comfortable speaking up and not just sticking to sports per se. And so for SIDs to kind of continue to be cognizant of the power that they have and the kind of responsibility they have to lift up their athletes and promote their message is such a tremendous opportunity. And some of these efforts might not be forward facing. They might not be what everyone sees, but it's kind of this behind the scenes work, this constant grind behind the scenes that makes this change and growth. And that's what is the most worthwhile, I think.
Thanks, Sarah. I guess I'll kind of close this out. I'll try and be brief because I'm sure we'll be getting called back here at some point soon.
Katie,
but I think
Katie, you have time. We'll
okay.
go over if we need to. Don't feel rushed.
Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. I think both what Travis said and what Sarah said kind of tie back into kind of where I'm coming into this conversation from, which is like the DEI committee work that I think a lot of campuses over the last year and a half or so have probably either started or really put more of a focal point on diversity, equity, and inclusion committees and the work that you can do within your department. Hiring is obviously a big piece of that. Recruiting is obviously a big piece of that. But when it comes down to that, you have to make sure that you're bringing people into an inclusive and welcoming environment, which I think Sarah and Travis both talked about. So intentional, but aware of the environment you're bringing them in, and what are you doing in your department specifically as SIDs to make it more welcoming, whether that's for a graduate assistant or an assistant SID, or, you know, a student athlete that you're going to have come in for an interview of some sort, those kind of things, and keeping that in mind. But I think when it comes to DEI committee work and DEI in general, it's overwhelming because it's so much unknown. And I think when people think of SIDs, they think of us as the know-it-alls. You know, you can ask, you know, and, you know, where does your starting point guard rank in the conference in assists per game? And you're going to say, oh, you know, first, 3.4 per game or whatever it might be. And you're going to know it and be able to kind of rattle it off right away. And when you get into DEI, there's a lot of questions and there's not a lot of, you know, concrete answers, because at the end of the day, none of us really know the answers. We're working towards a common goal. But knowing an answer, and I think more challenging for us as SIDs, is not knowing things. So I think being okay with that and being open to educating yourself, whether that's being an active member on a DEI committee within your athletic department, within your conference, within COSIDA, or if it's more, I'm going to sit in on a meeting and see kind of where the conversations are going, because I think that helps us understand how to better tell the stories if we're getting that perspective that maybe you're missing going into it. The other part of it is we live in such a social media driven environment that I think everyone feels like we're doing this, it has to go on social. And I think you have to be aware of that line of, is this coming off as performative? And we're just saying, you know, like Sarah and Travis said, are we just checking this box by showing you that we're doing it? Or are we doing it, learning from it, and kind of like really letting it permeate through our department? And so it can be something like participating in the NCAA's Diversity and Inclusion Week, but it can't be the only thing you do. You can't just put DEI stuff out for 3 days in October, maybe one thing to start Black History Month, and maybe one thing for Pride, and say we're doing a great job. Because if that's all you're doing and you're not doing things on your campus and in your department that really elevate those conversations, that really shine a spotlight on those different areas, it just comes off as a miss, I think, for student athletes and people who identify within those ways in your department too. And so you want to make sure that you're welcoming with it. But I think the important thing, and I think my biggest nugget of this, is do the work year round, be intentional, be aware, and hold yourself accountable. Whether that's like, you know, setting your kind of goals for the year and you're saying, well, we're going to try and do a student athlete feature video once a month. Well, am I just featuring 12, you know, white student athletes? Am I just featuring 10 males and 2 females? Or how am I spreading it out? And how am I showing diverse stories and telling their stories and elevating their voices? I think those are easy ways that we can kind of hold ourselves accountable and continue to push the story forward. I also think sometimes it's easier as when you don't know, and this kind of goes back to Sarah's talk about voting initiative. I learned a lot about voting in the states that all touch Illinois this past fall, because we did do a voting initiative with DEI committee work. And because we're more of a regional school and we pull students more regionally, it was important for us not to just to say, here's the voting deadlines in Illinois, but here's the surrounding states. And if your state's not listed, here's the information to find that. I didn't know that information, but someone on the committee was in charge of that, found it and gave it to me. And given my skill set, I was able to produce a graphic that kind of displayed that in a nice, easy way. So I think just not being afraid to use your skill set to make a difference, but also understanding that you're learning just like everybody else is kind of my important takeaway.
Anybody have any questions for the panelists? Well, if anyone has any questions that maybe they feel more comfortable with asking via email or anything like that, feel free to reach out to our panelists. Thank you to the three of you. We'll go back into the main room now, and then we'll see everyone in there in a little bit.